This week's episode of the Autoblog podcast is brought to you by the Autoblog Daily Digest. It's a great way to stay updated with what's happening in the world of cars in just 2 or 3 minutes every day. Ask your smart speaker for the Autoblog Daily Digest to stay up to speed with the latest car news, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back to the Autoblog podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today is West Coast editor James Riswick and road test editor Zach Palmer. We got a great show for you today. We're going to talk about the Land Rover Disco that Zach drove. He spent some time on the track, lucky man, with the GTI. I just drove it on the road, although I did actually drive it very close to the track you drove it on. And the Subaru Outback Wilderness. James, did you take it to the wild?
Well, I took it into the Columbia River Gorge, but that sounds more awesome. Interesting than it actually. Well, it's beautiful, but it's not that adventurous in terms of the roads that are needed to take. But this is kind of, as I live in Portland, the Outback Wilderness is kind of like the AMG now of Subaru. So much like when I lived in Los Angeles, there's Mercedes everywhere. But if you have the AMG badge, you know, you're that much cooler. People who know that you are something special and you have the good one. Well, the Wilderness is sort of that version of the Outback for people here in the Pacific Northwest. They notice it because it is the most Outbacky of the Outback. And so let's go over what that includes. Now, the Outback, just like every other Subaru not named BRZ or Legacy, has 8.7 inches of ground clearance. That's a lot. This thing has even more. It's like 9.5, which is like giving you a pickup truck. Like that's an astonishing amount. And if you look at the thing, you can really tell. They did this just by changing the suspension. The suspension itself is also been redone to just perform better off-road. The resulting ride is firmer, but not so much that you really care because the Outback's kind of a marshmallow anyway. Also, the bumpers are just redesigned, different fender flares. You have these hexagonal LED fog lights that look pretty cool. You have Yokohama Geolander off-road tires with white lettering on them and these black wheels. They look super, super cool. The downside to them is they make handling a bit of an adventure because the steering of the Outback, all the other ones, pretty nebulous on center, pretty numb. And then when you add that to all-terrain tires, you have the fun kind of delayed yaw response of all-terrain tires. So you turn the wheel, then you kind of wait a millisecond, and then you can feel the wheel or the tires responding. So that's fun in addition to the Subaru. So it can be a bit spooky at times if you actually try to hustle it along. I drove it on slightly damp roads, and the amount that the car started to slide through a hairpin turn, not going very fast, kind of amusing. So unless you're really going to be using this thing off-road, you might want to think twice about it for that reason. Otherwise, it does look super cool with its extra lift and its different bodywork and the copper highlights on it, and this geyser blue color, which this is on my Instagram, took a picture of it, it's pretty cool. I happened to capture it just as a 19th century paddle wheel was passing by on the Columbia River Gorge. That tends to not happen in Michigan, I don't think. Just paddle wheel going by where you're taking cars photo. Otherwise, it looks really cool. The geyser blue is special to the Wilderness, and we're led to believe that there will be other Wildernesses, cross-track ascent, probably Forester, and they will also be available with this blue color, as well as, I'm guessing, those other copper elements. So this is going to be the future of the ultimate Subaru lineup for those people who really are serious about their outdoor adventures.
It's interesting because I could easily see myself buying an Outback, but I don't really feel like I would, like, to be really practical, other than I want to look cool. I don't really think I would need a wilderness for, like, the half a dozen times I go up north, the road to the cabin is like 600 yards. Like, I don't think I would need all of this stuff, but I'd get to look cool. But the rational Greg on the right shoulder says, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe let's get this cool looking thing. The Greg that might buy like a Wrangler or Rubicon on my other shoulder says, you want this. But I don't know. Sounds cool.
Yeah, it's still just as practical. I mean, one other difference is the roof rails. That's one key thing, is all the other Outbacks have the roof rails that swing in to be roof racks. There's only 2 positions on them, which is a downside for some people, depending on what you're going to put on it. There's also a significant weight limitation. This, however, has fixed, serious, strong roof rails with a higher weight limit. There's also tie-down points. You see there's little copper, kind of like, almost like badges on each bumper, and they pop off, and there's mounting points for hooks, so you can put like a giant kayak on the roof very easily and be able to tie them down. So there's a lot of thoughtful touches in it. It's not just, let's make this look cooler for the sake of making it look cooler. There actually is a significant amount of functional improvement to it. It's also, despite being kind of the ultimate Outback in terms of spirit, it is not the most expensive one. It just slots above the Onyx XT. So the fancier touring and limited ones are actually more expensive with this when they have the standard, when they have the turbocharged engine, which is standard on the Wilderness.
I feel like I would probably skew lower in the Outback range as far as what I would actually personally buy. Like, a lot of the stuff and capabilities, I'm not sure I would necessarily need.
No. Well,
yeah. That tire thing makes me slightly worry. I was actually chatting with a good friend of mine who was asking me if she should buy an Outback, probably about 2 or 3 weeks ago at this point. And at that point, I was like, well, maybe take a look at this Wilderness thing, because she's owned a couple Wranglers in the past and she's really liked those. And she's like, well, I do a lot of commuting on the highway. I want to get better fuel economy, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, this sort of like splits the bill almost, in that, you get halfway decent Outback fuel economy. You have 9.5 inches of ground clearance. That's so much. That is a lot for a car that still, rides relatively like a car.
For anything, honestly. Literally anything, for anything. That's a lot.
For anything, yeah. And it seems like, that it's a nice little middle point, and I think it looks way cooler than an Outback. Has less of, I don't know, whatever stigma of maybe buying a station wagon, because it's higher in the air and has all the big black cladding and neat gold accents too.
Well, actually, she is kind of perfect for it, because when the steering response that I experienced, the thing that was most reminiscent was the last generation Wrangler on balloonier tires. It was exactly, you kind of saw the wheel back and forth, and things get spooky, even those, and that doesn't happen in most normal cars. So she would actually kind of be the perfect person, someone who kind of likes that type of vehicle but needs something more practical. And the Outback is super practical. It is more practical than the typical compact or mid-size SUV. It just is.
Exactly.
Cool. So how about we transition over to SUVs? What about the Disco? You had the Land Rover there, Zach. What did you do with it? I assume you didn't go to the Columbia River Gorge.
I did not go to the Columbia River Gorge, but I did. I took it down some dirt roads. There are some sort of like narrowish trails near me that are not, I don't even want to call them trails, but there's some good up and downs there. And, maybe if you had a car that had a poor breakover angle, you wouldn't be so happy. But no, it's good there as it always has been. It's that big 3-row crossover SUV that makes some serious overtures to being off-road like. And I've always had a weird soft spot for the Discovery in general. I really loved the fact that you could get a diesel engine with it before. I know, James, after your most recent acquisition of a diesel SUV, I'm sure that sort of hits a spot for you too. But I'm a big fan of the asymmetrical styling. That's still around. I should actually mention that the reason that we're driving this is because Land Rover refreshed the Disco lineup for this year. Totally new engines. The diesel that I loved so much is now gone, and it has been replaced by both a 2-liter turbo or 3-liter inline 6. I drove the inline 6 version. And the whole car in and of itself has been, refreshed and rejigged to be more car-like than SUV-like, because the Defender exists now, which sort of leaves it in this weird space in between. There's the Defender for super off-road ruggedness that also has 3 rows, but then you have the Disco 3-row off-road ruggedness with 3 rows. So the new Disco has adaptive dampers that are supposed to make it handle better. The inline 6 is smoother. And it has a new R Dynamic S trim that is supposed to make it look sportier too. So you have all of those things put together, and Land Rover hopes that it still has a place in between its Range Rover, Defender, and now its big SUV lineup. I think that some of the changes work, some of the changes don't. Unfortunately, when they went and made it, more car-like for the road with those dampers, it also rides a lot stiffer now. And it really doesn't handle all that much better either, unfortunately. What would you really expect with the Land Rover Discovery? But really, they didn't get much better at all there. But the one thing I feel like, if you were an old Discovery owner, when they completely redesigned it for 2017, the thing you'll be most happy to see in this one is the new infotainment system, which is the Pivi Pro infotainment that is going into a bunch of Jaguars and Land Rovers these days. It is head and shoulders better than what the old Jaguar Land Rover infotainment was, because it doesn't glitch out all the time. There's much less lagging, and it's just overall much nicer and easier to deal with better graphics. So that's pretty much what you'll like. There's definitely some to not like, but there's Jaguar Land Rover is in this place where they're refreshing almost their entire lineup right now. I know we just had Byron Hurd. He, our associate editor there, drove a bunch of them, and they're really applying similar updates across the line. So the offensive continues.
Okay, so let's transition over to the hot hatch segment. This is the Volkswagen Golf GTI. Zach, you got to drive it on a track, M1, that's just north of Detroit. It's a pretty good track. It's a lot of fun. I drove it on the road, but you actually got to really have some fun. This sounds like some special tires on it. So tell us about what this was like.
Yeah, so funny story about those tires. We get to the event, and I waltz right up there, and I noticed right away that the Mark 8 GTIs, so they had Mark 8s and Mark 7s there for us to compare. But the Mark 8s were on these Bridgestone Potenza RE71R summer tires, which, if you're very familiar with very sticky 200 treadwear summer tires people like to use on track days and SCCA events and whatnot, these are a great tire of choice for those that like to compete there. And Volkswagen decided to fit the new GTIs with those tires. Problem being, those tires are not available from the factory. So a lot of the impressions that I got of the car were basically on tires that are far more capable than anybody will actually get when they go and purchase their GTI from the dealership. if you want to get those super awesome tires, which I learned very quickly on track are awesome, just head on over to Tire Rack or whatever other tire store you want. But there's still, some few comparisons that you can make there, even with those, you can call them cheater tires, whatever you want to call them. On there, the new GTI is slightly faster, has a few more horsepower, a few more pound-feet of torque. And really the big difference that I noticed out on track is the fact that you can slot it into a new stability control sport mode, and you can actually turn stability control off in the Mark 8, whereas you cannot do so in the Mark 7 GTI. And that basically lets you, the person that knows how to drive the car without the electronics getting in the way, which I greatly appreciated. I was pretty annoyed at the Mark 7 out there in its traction control off mode without ESC basically helping, and instead it was hurting you. I actually experienced the same thing. My dad had a Mark 6 GTI, I don't know, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, that we took to a track day, and similar story there. You can turn traction control off, but the other electronics require going in with a computer and reflashing things to make it work with you. And it was similarly frustrating there. But with the new one, right out of the gates, you get a traction control and stability control system that work nice. The limited slip diff is tied in there really great. It's not there that it's like pulling you and yanking you around corners. It's more or less doing a good job, just getting rid of that feeling of the front wheel spinning up on tighter corners, and in general making your life a lot better around the track. One other big thing that I'll mention that they did with the new GTI is they gave it a much larger brake master cylinder, which ended up making the pedal feel a lot more reassuring on track. We were at M1 Concours in Pontiac there, and there's one big long straightaway where you get up to about 110 miles per hour with these cars, and where the Mark 7 get a bit squirrely under braking, when you really got in there on the pedal, you could lay on the Mark 8 a lot better, and felt like the brake distribution force was more consistent, and just overall much more confidence inspiring. So, in conclusion there, from that track drive, Mark 8, far superior track car versus the Mark 7, but big asterisk mark on everything because of those tires. What percentage of it is those tires, and what percentage of it is the retuned suspension, the retuned limited slip diff with the new vehicle dynamics manager. All of those little things certainly make a difference, but it was difficult. At least Volkswagen made it difficult for us to actually tell that difference driving them back to back on track because of the tires.
Did you think the changes to like some of the like mechanicals, like the extra power, made any difference on the track?
It is. So, we did follows where, I was in the Mark 8 and somebody ahead of me was in the Mark 7. And so I could see on track, like how quickly am I pulling this person in, actual just going down the straightaway at 100 miles per hour. And it makes a very, very tiny difference, I think. Maybe by the end of the straightaway, I want to say it was about like a 3 to 5 mile per hour difference, depending on how fast you were coming off the big long corner before the straightaway. So small difference. And honestly, some of that difference could have just been I'm carrying more speed through that corner because of having those tires that you can carry more speed through the corner. But seat of the pants, honestly, it's really difficult to actually tell that speed difference.
Do you think the 6-speed manual has any real difference other than it seemed like the shifter was a little bit different to me? I didn't see any big difference in the shifts. I don't know if you picked anything up there.
No, I think that the actual shifter feels exactly the same. The shift knob is what really annoyed me, was the fact that I have this big clunky thing in my hand now. I've always been a fan of a smaller shift knob. It just feels more precise, more snickety snick through the gears. That's just a personal preference of mine, though. The one thing that I noticed with the transmission that was slightly different was the clutch. The Mark 8 GTI's clutch felt super numb to me versus the Mark 7's, which was a little weird. And I got out of several Mark 7 GTI manuals and several Mark 8 GTI manuals, and it was the same in both. Whereas the clutch feel, I don't know, maybe somebody had just annihilated the clutches in those Mark 8s, and they were roasted from spending so much time getting hot on track or what. But I greatly preferred the feel and the actual feeling at engagement in the Mark 7s over the new one.
Cool. Well, that is the Volkswagen GTI on track at the M1 Concourse. That's in Pontiac. Check out Zach's story. It went up this week. It's a really nice piece. There's even some on track pictures, if you will. Looks like Volkswagen got some good shots. So check all that out. And track time. It's back. It's a fun thing. Let's move on to some news items here. We have, a new Lexus NX that came out, I want to say like Monday morning or Sunday night, kind of a weird time, if you will.
Friday night.
But it's Friday night.
It was a Friday night near midnight.
Yeah.
Release.
So that's even better. Sunday, you might be looking at your computer. Friday night at midnight, you're almost assuredly not.
I was wondering why I missed this. And then all of a sudden, like, oh yeah, that's why they decided to, it's like, Friday night or Saturday morning if you're in Japan. Like, got to get those newspaper deadlines out.
Anyways, touchpads though, right? I mean, what do you guys think?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so this is the first Lexus product I know we've had in a long time that doesn't actually have a touchpad. There are a lot of really like cool and neat things about the NX, in that it has a new hybrid powertrain, a new plug-in hybrid powertrain that is very similar to it basically is the RAV4 Prime's powertrain in there, which we have all driven here and we really like. Nice. But about those touchpads, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I've been complaining for years at this point about Lexus touchpads and their commitment to them. They think that is, I don't know, the best way to control their infotainment. I know it started with the mouse, which I despise even more than the touchpad itself. But neither of them have been good solutions. Both of them make normal tasks that would go by in an instant take much longer, and I know take my attention away from the road a lot more. But with this new NX, those touchpads are gone, and we have an actual touch screen. I saw that there's a smaller touch screen, and then there's a big 14-inch touch screen that is optional, which, man, that sounds like a really big touch screen for that small of a car, honestly. That's stuff that we're used to seeing in, either massive trucks or something like the Mustang Mach-E or Teslas, even, with the touchscreen taking up the entire area. But one neat thing that I saw in there is that it's sort of a play off of, it's similar to the Mustang Mach-E's physical dials within that touchscreen, is that they have, a physical dial built into the screen that you can control your climate control temperature from. Yeah. And it looks really neat. And, it's something, if you do like those knobs and switches, that I feel, it's something you use all the time and could keep you happy with the big screen there too. Yeah,
that's a nice thing because because the climate controls are integrated within the touch screen as well, which normally means you're tapping a screen a lot. In this case, you have the actual climate knobs with like kind of built in, and you can tell that they just applied those knobs to the outside of what the glass of the touchscreen is. There's still a volume knob, and that screen is huge. It's really big. And to the point about the touchpad, I'm with you. I do not like them. Whether it's in the Mercedes Command, don't like it there. But there is something to be said, though, for the screen and knob format, because it allows you it's just quicker to quickly twirl a knob and keep your eyes on the road, as opposed to trying to line your finger up on the dash and lean forward. There is an advantage to that, that Audi and BMW, when they did MMI and iDrive respectively, they were onto something, and it still works. As you mentioned, Greg, I just bought an 8-year-old BMW, and iDrive works really well, works better for some things than like Apple CarPlay does, and it's an 8-year-old car. So the other thing with Lexus they're going to deal with is that we kind of saw this with the new LS, but by having the screen far away and integrated within the dash, it allowed for more attractive dashes. And it's going to impact when eventually they will put a touchscreen in the Lexus LC, and that interior will not be as good looking, because this screen looks really cool in this NX, but it's a great big television in the dash, and aesthetically, that's just not very sleek and interesting looking. It's a little ugly.
Yep. No, having it, under like a nice hood there, beautiful horizontal lines all the way across the dash. It did look great. That as you mentioned there with the LC especially. I mean, I think that's the most beautiful interior in all of cars these days. And when they do eventually go away from these inconvenient to use touchpads, yeah. It's a very valid point. The interiors simply won't look as good. They'll be more usable, but you won't be able to say like, wow, the Lexus LC is, the most beautiful interior out there, because there'll be this thing in the dash that, just is not as elegant as everything else around it.
Cool. So let's do a real quick lightning round. I like to drop these into podcasts. We talk about beers. We talk about all sorts of things. You basically driving on M1 there, Zach, made me think, man, I want to drive on M1 sometime soon. And I think we were trading emails about Lime Rock on a separate matter. Real quick, tracks you guys haven't been on that you would love to get on. Zach, you're up first.
Yeah. My number one dream track would probably be the Suzuka circuit in Japan. That's my dream track because that was always my favorite track in Gran Turismo growing up. I would basically, as you do as a kid, you go in and you modify all the cars that you bought in Gran Turismo to whatever spec, and then you go and you race them on the track and you see which one has the fastest lap. And I would do this at Suzuka all the time. And I have that track so memorized like the back of my hand. It's stupid. And I've never been in Japan, but I could like walk that track and know every single thing about it. And yeah, it would be a dream come true to race that track one day. Absolutely.
I'll say real quick, I drove it back in December of 2010, 2012. It was amazing. And I drove like an Acura hybrid prototype. Was as good as probably you can imagine. It was a really awesome track. How about you, James?
Nürburgring.
Yeah.
Let's see what the big deal is.
That's a good one. I'm not sure this rates up there, but I'm kind of with Lime Rock. Everybody talks about it, just like Paul Newman raced there. It was just it's such an iconic track. And I mean, I'm kind of curious. Plus, I like fall in the Northeast. So it sounds pretty good to me, right? Cool. Let's spend some money. All righty. This one comes from Isaiah. Really enjoys listening to all of us, especially when he goes on his drives to take photos. Sounds good. Was referring to take some photos of his Mark 7 Golf. It was in an accident on the 15 in San Diego. That sounds like it's kind of rough. Sad about the situations, naturally. Considering he had Gunther, it sounds like he named the car. Okay, cool. Had been through a lot together. Prior to my Golf, I had a Jeep Renegade Trailhawk, which I loved. Maybe a tad more than the Golf, but it was a lemon, okay? He's still willing to give Jeep another chance. Also enjoyed taking it on the trails, doing things like that. So some of the cars he's considering are a first-gen Tiguan with 4Motion, a Golf All-Track, maybe a GTI or an R. You've really come to the right episode of the podcast for this. or maybe looking at a V60 Cross Country or a Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk. Two more, Compass or a two-door Wrangler. So that's basically the long and short of it. Doesn't want to go above $30,000, so he's been primarily looking at used vehicles. Thanks for writing, Isaiah. I'll kick it over to you, James. What do you think?
Well, as you've already lifted a Golf, get a Golf R, lift it. I've seen one of these. There was recently one for auction on Bring a Trailer or Cars and Bids, I don't remember, but it was really cool, and I would absolutely do that. Because the All-Track, yeah, it's kind of lifted, but kind of barely. You're going to have to lift the thing anyway if you actually want to use it. And then you'd have a really cool car that's kind of a rally take on the Golf R. That would be super cool. You've already done, just make a cooler version of what you had before. And yeah, that would be a rad car. You should totally do that.
It's a pretty good take. Go ahead there, Zach.
I don't disagree with you there, James. That's definitely the coolest thing to do of all the options that you've listed out there. A lifted Golf R gets a big stamp of approval to me. If you want to go something more factory fitting, I would suggest perhaps a Bronco Sport. You can have, your brand new car for under $30,000 if you want, or you could go used and maybe get one that's, I don't know, maybe 6 months old at this point, close to a year almost, and bang, you have great off-road capability, all the new tech you'd want, and it's a pretty cool looking car too, if you ask me. It's definitely not going to be as fun as a Golf R on road, but a little option if you want a little more off-road capability, I think.
It's interesting because to me, there's a little bit of two different things here. You kind of want that, you're considering a GTI, a Golf R, you're looking at lifting, but you also talk about how just off-roading is such an important part of what you want to do. It's tricky because used cars right now are they are inflated. My initial impulse is almost just to look at a used Wrangler, but for 30 grand, you're probably not going to get a lot of a used Wrangler, just because prices, like I said, are so inflated right now. But I would still at least, have some fun, look at the listings, see if you could find a used Wrangler for about 30 grand and live that life for a while. I mean, I've never owned a Wrangler. I sort of feel like looking at them on a used in normal times, like the used car perspective, could be the right way to get into the Jeep brand and go from there. So that's kind of my recommendation. Go a little bit differently than you guys. But good luck with the search, Isaiah.
Yeah, and at $30,000, you can get yourself a really nice used Wrangler. I feel it might not be a fully loaded Rubicon and whatnot. That's from 2018 and up. But you could probably get a nice JK that has some options. Maybe it has a few mods you already like on it. It's definitely a valid option so long as you can handle the fuel costs that come with it. I know that fuel is a little expensive these days, so maybe if just depending on where you live, just take that into account. Yeah,
that's some good perspective. Give those some consideration there, Isaiah. And then we have one update from Cameron. This is from episode 681. He had a BMW 135 and a Tacoma. He was going to replace them. It was keep one, keep both, sell both. And basically what he does is he writes in and he says, hey, I appreciate the insight and I enjoy listening to the podcast. We'll definitely consider embracing the future and looking at the XC90 hybrid. That is a quote from senior editor for All Things Green, John Snyder. So, hey, take John's advice. He knows what he's talking about. And thanks for the update, Cameron. Really appreciate it. Please send us your questions for the mailbag. That's podcast@autoblog.com. Please send us your spend my monies. We love to spend your money. And, hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, all of our social platforms. Be safe out there. We'll see you next week.